My name is Travis Folk. I am the founder and chief cartographic designer for New World Cartography. We are located in Green Pond, South Carolina, which is halfway between Charleston and Beaufort in the Ace Basin. New World Cartography designs and produces hand-drawn and hand-colored maps, much in the way maps were produced for centuries, up until the last 10 to 20 years. We are, maps by and large these days are digital. They're both utilitarian and incredibly accurate, but have very little passion or attraction the way maps from the 17th or 18th centuries do. The origin of our company really started in land management. I'm a wildlife biologist, and my father is both a biologist and a forester, and started Folk Land Management here in the Ace Basin in the 1980s. Back then, of course, desktop computing, much less GIS software or even Google Earth, obviously wasn't available. So in managing land, if you needed to know acreages or linear footage, you would have to develop a map by hand. And so here in the company, we have multiple plantations where we have hand-drawn maps that do exactly that. You would produce one master map for a property that had all that information and then would refer back to that whenever you're making management advice over the years. Some of these maps are 20, 30, 35 years old. Fast forward to the 21st century, when I completed my education, came back and started working the business. I saw these old maps of plantations that we still work on and loved them, and yet my maps were 8.5 by 11s printed off on the printer and looked at for 2 seconds and tossed in the trash can. Combine that with my love of old maps and hours of poring over them and reading about them, and realizing that there's nobody in the 21st century that does cartography in a traditional fashion, which is to say that you start with a blank sheet of paper, you draw a map, and you hand color it, and it's an expression of exactly what the cartographer, and in our case the client, wishes. That's in contrast to a digital context where you click a couple of buttons and it's both very accurate, but it really doesn't have that passion. So I founded New World Cartography several years ago to do exactly that, create originally designed, hand-drawn, and hand-colored maps. This is an example of one right here that covers the Charleston area from the Isle of Palms down to Kiowa. And this started with a blank sheet of paper. The client was interested in a map, large map that showed the islands, the rivers, the thoroughfares in and around Charleston. This map, the original, hangs in a hotel on Kiowa Island. In early 2019, I was approached by Jody Hayward and Joan Crawford of the Port Royal Sound Foundation, the executive director and a board member, respectively, to produce a map for the Maritime Center. It was somewhat of an overwhelming charge to me, and I was shown a blank wall that was 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide and said, put an entire map in there. Once I gulped and said, yeah, we can do it, we then had to figure out how. The map that many of you will see is the result of that, of about 7 or 8 months worth of work to both, as I mentioned earlier, to start with a blank sheet of paper, work with Jody, Joan, and the other staff at the Port Royal Sound Foundation to elicit out of them, what do you want in a map? What do you want it to look like? What information do you want in it? What fonts do you want? What color palette? What bird species do you want included? So that map directly expresses the mission and the goal of the Port Royal Sound Foundation. And I hope and think that it does, and I hope everybody enjoys it. That map started, ultimately we did not go 10 by 20 feet, but the map that you see is 9 feet tall and is 14 feet wide. It was done in 5 panels, each panel being 9 feet tall and 33.5 inches wide. Each panel was drawn on Mylar, which is nothing more than a plastic type material that's semi-translucent, where the ink work, the black ink work, both what we call landform lines as well as text and other decorative elements can be added. All of this was done. 5 strips of Mylar, 9 feet tall by 33.5 inches wide, were drawn. Once that was done, this then is scanned. That allows us to then print on heavy bond watercolor paper, which is what you see here. This paper has high cotton content and also a thin film of clay on top, and it's perfectly suited for our watercolor. So again, we had those 5 Mylars, 33 by 33 inches by 9 feet. Those were scanned, then printed on this paper, and then each one of those was hand colored. Once we then printed the ink work onto the cotton rag watercolor paper, and we then hand applied that coloration, because the Port Royal Sound and the Maritime Center is a public space and people come and go, a hand-colored map might not last as long as we would all hope if out in front of the general public. So the decision was made to do a high-resolution scan of each one of those panels and then merge those files into one master image, high-resolution image of the map. That then was printed on a high-count cloth material and then mounted to the aluminum frame. And that's what you see hanging in the Maritime Center today. The map has got multiple details, and it was an enjoyable and fun process to go through with Jody and Joan and the staff to decide what do we want on this map beyond roads, creeks, bridges, all that sort of stuff. What are the other things we want on there? And of course, because of the mission of the Port Royal Sound Foundation, we included the 4 basic tenets that they promote and educate on about Port Royal Sound, and you'll see those in the bottom center of the map. Because of the ecological focus of the foundation, the decision and the charismatic beauty of so many bird species in the Low Country, the decision was made to have a collection of the birds of the Low Country. So off on the right-hand side of the map, you'll see 12 species that are both beautiful and at different times of the year common in the Port Royal Sound area and the Low Country in general. This is the main line that goes all the way to Florida to New York. Other details that we included in the map are a inset on the upper left-hand side, and that reflects the diversity of depths within the Port Royal Sound. One of the things the Port Royal Sound is known for is the extreme depths, which are some of the greatest along the east coast of the United States. That inset was produced from some recently derived data from NOAA, where they systematically mapped with bathymetric methods the underwater topography of the Port Royal Sound. It was real fun to try and express that in a semi-artistic fashion, the diversity of depths throughout the sound. That's what you'll see in that inset in the upper left-hand corner. Some of the other elements you'll see on 17th and 18th century maps, these small sketches of trees just primarily to fill space. And we did that as well. We have live oak, longleaf pine, and the palmetto tree, or the cabbage palm tree, the state tree of South Carolina. But to provide some ecological justification for it, those trees are by and large segregated. And along the coast, in the near coastal areas, are the live oaks and palmetto trees, which reflect 2 of the main components of maritime forest, which are what you would naturally find in those coastal areas bordering the Port Royal Sound and all of the other areas covered in this map. As you move farther inland during pre-Columbian times, those were by and large fire-maintained pine forests, dominated by longleaf pine. So we included that sketches of longleaf further inland. So while they are to some degree something to use up a blank space, they reflect the habitat differences, whether it's the coastal maritime forest or the more inland fire-maintained longleaf pine savanna. Another element is we've highlighted the location of historic rice fields, all the way from the Savannah River all the way up to the Ace Basin. That resulted from a 4-year research project between Clemson University, the Nemours Wildlife Foundation, and Folkland Management, where we systematically mapped historic rice fields, some of which date to the first decade of the 1700s. Many of those rice fields are actually still being used today, albeit not for rice, but rather for a conservation purpose. The final detail element that we added was the location of 12 historic sites in and around Port Royal Sound. Dr. Larry Rowland, formerly professor of history at University of South Carolina, Beaufort, and Dr. Stephen Wise, historian at the museum at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot at Parris Island. Both of them were very generous with their time to help us understand the diversity of historic sites around Port Royal Sound. And you'll see those with a series of numbers across the map and then a small legend in the bottom that just gives some context for those locations. So this map was not the sole result of my efforts, but rather a team effort. I designed the map and oversaw the production. Tony Waters, our chief cartographic artist, was really the force behind making the foundation's vision and my vision come to life. So what you see is the result of the penmanship and the coloration capability of Tony Waters from Charleston. David Kaminsky in Savannah, with Savannah Color Separations, was a huge part in scanning these panels and then stitching them together such that they then could be printed on this high count cloth panel that you see in the Maritime Center. The map took a long time. This map took about 275 to 300 hours for us to produce, and that included everything from the design time to thinking about the map, wrapping our heads around such an enormous undertaking, but then obviously the lion's share, the vast majority of the hours, were just the time in quiet solitude, sitting at the drafting table, drawing the map, and then secondarily doing the coloration. So it was an incredible undertaking. It was fun, and hopefully we'll have the chance to do it again sometime soon.